Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our Grand Rounds session today. A truly special Grand Rounds indeed. We are privileged to have Dr. Puneet Bhargava as our esteemed speaker. He came all the way from Seattle, where it's snowing apparently, and braved the snow to come to Connecticut, where it's also snowing. I want to share a little bit about him before we get going. So Dr. Bhargava earned his MD at Karnataka Institute of Medical Sciences in India before pursuing radiology residency in New Delhi. This was followed by a body fellowship at University of Washington in Seattle, where they wisely recruited him to stay on as faculty. And he's rapidly risen through the ranks there. He's currently a professor of radiology and the director of gastrointestinal radiology. So when asked to describe Puneet, the first thing that comes to mind for me is this concept of a Renaissance man. And while I don't normally go through anyone's CVs, their academic bibliography with a fine-tooth comb, let alone somebody who has over 200 easily publications, I did peek into his academic output, and I think that gives us some insight as to his talents. So on the first page of his 21-page PubMed profile, he has articles titled Preserving Legacies, an overview of physician estate planning. There's articles titled Incorporation of Macropaths into Abdominal Imaging to Improve Radiologist Productivity and Efficiency. Halfway through it, I'm seeing articles on burnout, I'm seeing articles on the psychology of creativity. And in between, he has fabulous papers on transplant imaging and a whole host of body imaging topics, some of which we have this morning. Now, it is through those latter clinical topics that I first got to know Puneet. I read so many of his articles as a faculty, as a resident, I still read them. But I really felt I discovered him through YouTube. And in keeping with the concept of Renaissance man, a couple of years ago, Dr. Bhargava started a YouTube channel focusing on topics that were seldom taught in radiology, things like productivity hacks, the science of learning, science of creativity, how to create award-winning presentations, how to be more creative, things like this. And as someone myself who's dabbled into this world, I can tell you that the videos are fantastic. The content is well researched, accessible to all, and the presentation is so polished. It's tough to do this stuff well. And he does it at a level that nobody's doing it in the radiology world. And so it is in that capacity that I wanted to invite him here. We heard about some of his body imaging talks earlier today, but for Grand Rounds, I basically said, I want you to come here and talk about whatever you want to talk about. And we'll be happy to hear it. And we're so grateful to host you for the first time at Yale. And everyone, please give him a warm welcome to Yale Radiology.
Well, you're so kind, Mahan. Yale is a very special department. Your history goes a long way. I have some really close friends here, former UW colleagues who are here, even 3 people with whom I did residency in the same city. It's truly special to come here, see your department, see your city. And I could not have imagined that on a day like today, Seattle would get more snow than you guys, because it doesn't happen that way. So I'm 49. I can see retirement on the horizon. But my interest in finance started actually 10 years ago. I didn't really share it with anyone because I was financially very stupid. I didn't really know much. I was gung-ho about my radiology career, totally focused to be the best radiologist I could be. But I'll tell you as we go along in the presentation how I stumbled into this topic and had to kind of learn it, and I was humbled by it. So the reason Dr. Gee, who was a former resident colleague of mine, we put together these materials because we both grew up in immigrant families with very diverse sort of experiences. She grew up with a father who kind of drilled this stuff into her since she was a kid, and I grew up in a family where money was never discussed, never ever. And mine was a 2-physician family. My dad would often buy stocks of companies that his friends had bought, and they had already done their thing, and he had he had a drawer full of paper stocks of companies that had gone bankrupt. Somehow his real estate investments worked out just fine. So he did he's fine in retirement, but he like I feel like he made a lot of money mistakes like we all do, and he never taught the kids. So this was a little bit frustrating to me that I had to learn this on my own, never being taught. But I thought that I would change that. And I think this is just like we learn any difficult topic in radiology. I think this can easily be learned. There's a few terms that is a little bit different that you have to get used to. Finance has its own lingo. But if you were ever become an administrator, these are very basic building blocks of um, finance. But for today, I'm not gonna talk about entrepreneurship, finance, or retirement finance. This is kind of a talk tailored to early and mid-career radiologists just to get you started. So if you can easily call somebody who is a finance person and they would come and teach you the same stuff and try to recruit you as a client, and they would make hundreds and thousands of dollars over the course of your career. That is not me here. And I think this topic is best learned from someone who ultimately has no financial disclosures pertinent to this topic. So anybody know who this guy is? I'd be very impressed if you did. He's not a radiologist, by the way. So this guy, his name is Mr. Money Mustache. He has this famous handlebar mustache. He doesn't have this anymore, but he has this really famous blog, and he calls himself the Warren Buffett of frugality. And this guy retired really early, I think in his late 30s as an IT professional in Colorado with just $600,000 because he only spends like something like $25,000 in a year. And he does not lead a life of denial. He's just figured out how to not spend too much money on basically everything. And I discovered his blog and I saw an image in his blog, which I'll show later in the talk, that actually changed me as a person. It was an extremely powerful person. But I think I want to start with this premise that imagine coming into work where the paycheck didn't matter, right? So you have a choice of not coming into work at that point, but you are here. How much more fun radiology would be if you came into work and the paycheck didn't matter? Now, this is not going to happen for residents or maybe anyone who is kind of in their first 15 years of their career, but radiologists often have 35-year-long careers. So imagine the last 2 decades or even a decade and a half, or even the last few years where you're coming in to kind of work on your legacy or things that bring you joy, because money doesn't matter at that point. So like most people, what doctors do is they'll say, okay, I'm a very busy doctor. I'm going to find a professional, and they hire a professional to handle their money. And they're very happy to have you as a client. And you come to an arrangement with what's called asset under management fee. AUM is what it's called. And 1 to 1.5% of assets under management is the typical fee in the finance community, and physicians usually sign up for this, and they're so happy, they're so thrilled with this arrangement because they never have to worry about it, and the money is being managed for them. Except that they don't realize that when you actually sign up for 1% assets over management, you're giving away 26% of your lifetime earnings to that financial professional. And if you signed up for something like 2%, you're giving up 40% and higher of your hard-earned money to them. It doesn't go in one big check. It's kind of taken away. And some of this percentage includes lost income from what that money would have grown had it stayed with you. So this is a major financial decision. It is not something to be taken lightly. But on the flip side, if you could learn to manage your own money, be diversified, and learn some of the basic things, and I'll guide you to some of the books, then you can do this by yourself. I actually had an anesthesiologist friend of mine who was the chief of neuroanesthesia at UW Medicine. His wife is a teacher, and they were having a conversation where his wife was like, I could take some tuitions at home to help with the family expenses, and they're giving away $30,000 every year to their financial advisor. So imagine. You're trying to make a little bit more money, but you're giving these people like a car every year, right, basically. So also something to think about that when we're younger, we think that we can control our retirement, that we are going to decide that, I'm gonna work until 56 or 60 or whatever age you have in mind. And I hear a lot of conversations around me. I have those conversations myself, that I'm gonna work until this age and then, I'm gonna quit on my terms. Guess what? Sometimes life has other plans and, today, any one of us could become a caretaker, a full-time caretaker for a spouse. We could have a child with special needs or an accident or, a parent needs help and, things can change. Or we could have a diagnosis, like if you actually look at the ages of people whose scans we read, it's very depressing, bad things are happening to people younger and younger. So the point being, if you're not prepared for this and life hits you when you're underprepared and no more money can come in, you can go from a very high income individual, a very high performing radiologist, to having a very meager retirement where you're tracking every dollar. So that thought actually scares me. Um, and then this is kind of my YouTube channel. I have two playlists. So if this stuff resonates with you, I have a beginner series of videos and I have a more advanced series of videos. But I read this fantastic book called The Psychology of Money. And there's this line in that book that the highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want to do today. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, for as long as you want is priceless. And that's the freedom that money can buy. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. That doesn't happen if manage one paycheck or 1 year of your life really well. But if you are committed, in a decade and a half, you can be at a point where money doesn't matter and you can live your life stress-free, not have any money concerns whatsoever. So what we're gonna do is, I've chosen what's called the Bogleheads model. I'll give a history of what a Boglehead is. We'll talk a little bit about how to protect your assets, and I am gonna talk about how to use this information to combat burnout, right? So John C. Bogle was a guy who basically started index mutual funds. So these are funds that are not, somebody's not handpicking any stocks, you're just buying the S&P index or any other index that you choose for almost free. And he revolutionized the industry because before what he did, people were just picking stocks. And I don't know about you guys, but there's actually a Swenson's model of investing from Yale. I think it's Swenson, I might be wrong, but there's a Yale model where the person managing Yale's trust came up with an all-weather portfolio, and he did fabulously well for Yale. He has been kind of legendary in the finance circles. So that is the history of Yale. Like all the university money was managed by this investor, and he had it such that the money was kind of rebalanced to decrease risk pretty much daily, and we're talking billions of dollars. So you guys have a phenomenal history of excellent money management at the university level. So John C. Bogle, his followers, people who adopt, his philosophy, who don't pick stocks, they are self-proclaimed Bogleheads. They have a website called Bogleheads, which is, a very understated website, but pretty much any finance question under the sun that you might have, there are long discussions on that forum. I invite you to check it out. It has about 50,000 visitors, but they're mostly financial nerds. But it's great for free advice and people debate, different ways to build a cat. So one thing unique about this topic is that everybody makes financial mistakes. I have yet to meet anyone who has never made a financial mistake their entire life. Vividly, I can remember a moment where I was sitting, this was a bright summer day, I was sitting in the local Bank of America branch in Seattle, in our neighborhood, and this bank manager kind of leaned forward looked straight into my eyes and he said, Puneet, you've got to get out of this variable annuity that you bought. And I retorted, well, I'm invested in this. If I cancel this annuity, I will lose $30,000, and $30,000 is all I had at the time. I was really early in my career. Salaries weren't that great back then. And he retorted back, he said, if you don't cancel this now, the losses will be in the hundreds and thousands of dollars if you don't act now. And he gave me this example of like when a patient is shopping around, they take multiple opinions. And this happened to be my third finance opinion. One was with a local credit union. We also have Fidelity that manages our accounts. So all three told me that basically get out of this annuity, which I had been sold. And basically, I lost all the money that I had. Now, the good news is that even though that was $30,000 and basically was, an early career bankruptcy, sort of self-inflicted, the good thing was it woke me up and I stopped all my projects. And for 6 months, I read book after book on personal finance and I taught myself. And so I have recovered those $30,000 manyfold over, but this is one of those things in life that you can make finance mistakes, and you will, I assure you, but you can't give up on it. Because otherwise, when you are old and unable to generate the kind of income you are right now, then your life will be very hard. So in spite of those mistakes, you have to keep pushing. So if there's one piece of advice I can give you guys, and if you can learn anything from my story, don't buy what's called a variable annuity. If you have one, go ahead and get a second opinion. Quite commonly, after I say this and when I'm presenting this topic, one or two people come up to me and they have ended up canceling a variable annuity that they were holding. It's a very pricey product. The investments within this product are some of the priciest, and it's a really bad deal for somebody owning it. In fact, it's so bad that in the finance community, they say that annuities are not bought, they are sold. You will be pitched as a physician, you will be pitched variable annuity, and it's a really bad idea to mix insurance with an investment product because it's just a recipe for disaster. Now, this is the psychology that we have to fight. Is that as a physician, as a high-performing, overachieving individual, high IQ, we actually kind of ignored the fact that we're actually dumb investors for the most part, because those skills don't translate. And if you haven't taken the time to learn finance, you are thinking that a smart doctor equals a smart investor, but that's actually not the case. In fact, if you're operating with that assumption, you're in dangerous territory. This is called domain dependence. Stick to your lane. And if you need financial help, find someone who charges by the hour, writes a written plan for you that you can execute on your own, getting into the assets under management sort of arrangement, just so that you don't have any finance headaches. You're gifting away a large portion of your estate that could go on to your heirs. So we all know this, right? So we actually, when we get our first paycheck, usually in our 30s, we actually don't start from zero. We actually start with several $100,000 in the debt. I was telling Mahan, in the neighborhood that I live in, Seattle, the median home price for a beat up home is currently 1.4 million. And that is now at 7% mortgage rates. So you can imagine a lot of our faculty are struggling to buy a house. They have to save for several years before they were ever enter an early home in Seattle. You have to kind of know how to get this right. But this happens to everyone, right? We all graduate and we're like, okay, I've lived my life in denial. I've finally arrived in life. You get your first academic paycheck and you're like, okay, it's only going to get better from here. And this kind of euphoria leads us to spend and spend big. And everybody does it. I myself, never had the money to buy an SUV. In the first, 3 to 4 months, I bought myself an SUV, and And I had buyer's remorse immediately afterwards, because not only did I use up all my money, another bankruptcy basically self-inflicted. But then every week it's gonna bleed money because this thing was a gas guzzler, right? So that was purely driven by, this need to say, okay, you've lived your life in denial. Now you don't have to anymore. And so if you're in that state, go spend that money, but spend that money in limits, right? Don't buy something really expensive, like don't buy a large yacht and whatnot, right? And then of course, we've all driven, used, very cheap, inexpensive, beat up cars. So, a lot of people buy really, really expensive cars. Nothing wrong with that, but early on, your money, early in your career, money is better spent elsewhere. And then, of course, another big, life's biggest purchase, basically our home. And people buy big, massive homes. In the last year or so, some of my colleagues have bought homes worth more than 3 million. It's not that hard to do in Seattle. And those homes are not even spectacular. They are just, in most parts of the country, they would be an average home that if you were to drive past them, they wouldn't even get a second look. But imagine getting a $3.5 million mortgage at 6 to 7%. If that paycheck didn't come in, you're gonna be on the street. That is the reality, right? And then they work hard and they're living paycheck to paycheck on a radiologist salary, right? Because they have not controlled their fixed costs. So basically, if you just control 3 costs, these are your fixed costs, you have won most of the battle. So you live in lesser home than you can afford, keep your mortgage under control. Hard to do in the current rates, but hopefully the rates will come down. A car takes you from point A to point B. There's nobody you can impress. You can buy the fanciest car and you go on the freeway, there's somebody who's driving a more expensive car literally next to you, so nobody's getting impressed. And if you're only gonna buy organic food and you're only gonna eat at gourmet restaurants, Michelin star places in town because you're a radiologist and you're full of yourself, then there's not gonna be that much left at the end of the month, and you are going to be living paycheck to paycheck. Now, credit cards is another thing, like it's really interesting that if you're buying something expensive, you actually took the cash and you have to count that money in 20 or 50 or even $100 bills, and most of us would be like, this is way too much money. I'm not gonna spend it, or we'll think about it, right? The credit card is just a swipe, right? It's basically buying stuff for free, except that you have to pay off the loan. And if you don't pay off the loan, the interest rate that these companies charge you range from 20 to 35%. That is basically an insane value for these credit card companies, how much they're charging you. I've worked with people who in their training put their entire wedding on a credit card, and I was shocked, and I asked one of my colleagues, and his retort was, "This is the American way," and I was like, "Whoa." So yes, you don't want to get into credit card debt. That's like one of the worst debts you can get into. And start chipping away at your debt if you're trying to build something. But if you haven't started, or you've been in denial, or you kind of have a head in the sand approach, that is not going to take you very far. You may be a very high performing radiologist, may have a spectacular career, but if you end and you're becoming old with like nothing to show for it, and your kids are asking, you as a grandparent for help with down payment, because I can only imagine what the Seattle homes would be like, and you can't help, they're gonna hate you because they have an idea of how much you're making, and they're thinking you're being mean by not helping them, while the reality is that you've made all this money, but you've mismanaged it, right? So just start. And it's humbling, right? I remember, I early on in my career as an assistant professor, my colleagues would go to the cafeteria, they would order like $6, $8 lattes, coffee drinks and snacks. I'm like, I can't afford this stuff. Like my bank balance is literal zero. I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I can't afford this stuff. And if you skip a coffee and a snack, then your wealth grows by $8 per day. It is a very humbling experience, right? But thankfully, it doesn't stay that way. If you keep good financial habits, the money starts to compound. And a lot of people, like, especially when they're searching for jobs, like I noticed that they try to find the job with the highest compensation, right? The reality is that the one thing that decides your financial outlook in terms of where you select a job is something called geo arbitrage, meaning where where you where you will end up living with the job that you're doing. So for example, a job that pays $100,000 less in Kansas, you'll probably be more wealthy if we paid you $100 more, but we're able to recruit you to live in Seattle. That's the reality, right? So people are fixated on the dollar amount and they think the Seattle job is gonna make them rich or wealthy. And then they shun the Kansas job while the person who did go to Kansas has lower expenses, can save more, and probably retires several years earlier than the guy who chose the Seattle job. So I think we have to move from this mentality of like income to net worth, right? So we have to be humble enough to ask ourselves, what is our net worth? Forget the salary. Like some portions of our salary can be negotiated. If you take more administrative roles, you can make a little bit more. But what is your net worth and how does it compare to the peers? But don't compare net worth, our net worth to what's available on the web, because those are people who are making 150, if we're lucky, $2,000, right? So that is not, our outlook should be much brighter, given that the amount of work we put in and the compensation we have currently. So we have to move from this income mentality to a savings mode, right? And I have yet to meet a radiologist who actually budgets. We don't. No high income physician actually budgets. But we have to know what kind of what is our savings rate, and that'll become clear why we should know our savings rate. I'll show you the image that made it very clear for me. But we should have a rough idea as to how much we're spending in a year. What you spend this month doesn't really matter that much. If you're taking a big vacation, obviously you'll have more expenses that much. But at the end of the year, when you look at 12 months in a year, what's the percentage of the money that you saved? Now, a lot of people, especially in the Seattle area, believe that, oh, all my net worth is tied to my home. I live in this $3 million home. It's a great investment. Obviously, it's going to appreciate, in the 20, 30 years that I'll work as a radiologist. I really don't have to do anything. And that's actually debunked. That actually our home is not a great investment. I'll explain why. It may be, if you got lucky, it may turn out to be a great investment, but is not necessarily a great investment. So a bigger home comes with a larger house tax. So in the Seattle area, we pay about 1 to 1.5% of the assessed value of the house as house tax every year. So that's one. A bigger house comes with a bigger roof. It comes with higher maintenance costs, big heating bills. Anything that you want to do in the house is just way exponentially bigger. So you don't actually come out ahead by just buying the biggest house you can buy because it's an investment, right? And there's in New York Times, there's a rent versus buy calculator, and I encourage you to run your own numbers as you're buying a house, or if you're a homeowner, just run your numbers and see, what are you coming out ahead financially because you went and bought, a huge home. And this is not me saying, this is, some really smart people saying. So early on, we all have debt and we want to pay off the debt because it's on our mind. We can't sleep if it's a bigger debt. There's actually two strategies. One is, let's say you have three different debts, right? Now, the psychology hack is, let's say the smallest debt you have is just $500. You could pay it off today if you wanted, right? But that's at a very low percentage rate, so you're keeping that because you're like financially it doesn't make any sense, but if you paid it off today, guess what? You only have 2 more debts remaining. Your brain looks at it as you're like, well done. You got rid of 1/3 of your problems, even though you haven't, but it's motivational to go aggressive at the second biggest debt from that point on. So for some people that works. Strictly financial speaking, it obviously helps to pay the highest interest rate debt first, right? So that is what you should pursue. But you should make minimum payments on all your debts because otherwise you go into those astronomical rates. And you want to start building wealth, right? You're not trying to become rich. I think rich has a very different connotation. In fact, rich is such a bad word, especially in the British system that, I don't know if you know much about British radiologists, but, if a very senior British radiologist, if they exceeded expectations and had glowing reviews, they make about 140,000 US dollars per year, which is if you're living in a city like London, that's very hard to even send your kids to good school. And if they do moonlighting and other stuff to increase their income, or if they go on a strike, they end up in the newspapers, and the newspapers label them as like greedy doctors want to make more money. So rich is looked down upon in being good cultures. Thankfully, that's not the American way. This is the good American way. We celebrate entrepreneurship, and we want people to become wealthy. And so, how do you become wealthy, right? So if you graduated as a resident, if you can live the first few years, even 3 years, even 1 year of your attending life without increasing your resident expenses and living like a resident, this is a phrase made very popular by the blog White Coat Investor, then you're setting yourself up for success. And every time you spend large amounts of money, you have to think, is this the best value for the money given your life situation? And every time your bonus goes up, or salaries have gone up recently significantly, instead of having lifestyle in bloat, how about you increase the amount of money that you invest for your future self every month? So just because you got a pay raise doesn't mean you suddenly start to eat at better restaurants or upgrade your car or buy a bigger house because you have more dollars coming in. And this is the last bullet point is actually the thing that helps me the most. Every time on the 31st when the paycheck shows up, I look at that money and the first thing is I'm like, how much of this am I truly gonna pay myself? And I immediately, send a large chunk of, that money post-pay, the paycheck money into my trading account and invest it for whatever. And it's a disincentive to sell those investments because if your investment did well, then IRS is gonna take a piece of, as capital gains. And so once you've bought it, there's a disincentive to sell it because your tax bill goes up. So I do that first, and and of course I save enough to pay all the credit card bills on time. They're paid off on the 31st night every month, and then I save a little bit as like running expenses. I don't worry about that too much because most expenses go on the credit card, and I have a software called Monarch Money. It's like $50 to $100 per year, which would basically it collects all of your money in one space, and in the app you can just see what your financial picture looks like. So I know exactly what's coming in, what's going out, where it's going, how it's invested, so I can track it. Now, all these years, we've all been to meetings where people talk about burnout, right? Like, I'm burnt out, I can't read this, I can't read that. And people complain about all the time. And some people even go as far as to say, well, if I had the money, I wouldn't be a radiologist, I wouldn't come to work the next day if I had all the money, right? And people show you all the burnout statistics, but nobody gives you any solutions, right? Like, I'm like, okay, I'm burnt out too. Do you have any idea how I can fix this burnout thing? And so I found that financial independence is one of those things that what people are really looking for is not a solution. People are looking for options, right? So imagine in your head, you're coming to work. Yeah, it's a busy day. Maybe you have some burnout symptoms. But you know in your head, you're here because of your love for radiology, you don't really need the money and you could retire today if you wanted to. It affects you less. You're less burnt out. You are less stressed than your colleagues. So I took this financial independence thing to heart. And the way to start is that before you start investing your first dollar, you need to have what's called in finance circles an emergency fund, right? What if you had a roof leak tonight and you need $10,000 to repair it like tomorrow morning? You should have that money ready to go. You should be able to drive to an ATM and get that 10 grand like tonight because it's an emergency, right? So that money should be part in a checking account. You could use your credit card for that expense and there's so many options, right? So savings account and checking account don't really pay that money, but if you go to online banks that don't have brick and mortar kind of, offices, then their expenses are less. For example, Ally Bank, I was checking last night, is paying 3.8%, better than zero. You can have a CD that you can break, there'd be a penalty, but you can do that. There's money market funds that more recently have been paying between 4 and 5.5%. You can do short-term bonds. There's options, but this is money for emergency. I'm not looking to make a lot of money from this money, and ideally it should be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And if you have a lot of money stress, maybe 1 year, but this is kind of personal finance is very personal. So depending on how much stress you have, you should have a little bit of your money, but at least 3 to 6 months. And so this is the second most important image that was life-changing for me. And I realized that those $8, coffee breaks that my colleagues were taking that I wasn't, I was in this first 8 years of my career where even though your financial journey is an exponential curve, but early on it's a linear line because everything that you save is how the net worth grows because you haven't anything significant invested. So even if the S&P index did 25% last year, you didn't have that much money, so you didn't eke out any gains from that. But when you're talking about hundreds and thousands of dollars, and maybe later on in your career, a few million, then 25% growth is a lot because you can run the numbers in your head, but if you had $4 million invested in the S&P index last year, you made a very cool $1 million in your investments. But if you didn't have the 4 million because you're a young radiologist, that 25% is just a statistic in one of those apps on your phone, right? It doesn't really mean much. But you have to kind of push through, and then as your savings reaches these higher numbers, that's when your savings and portfolios start to grow and you see significant income. But this can take years and years to happen, right? So, and that's why you see that all the old people are the people who are taking the cruises because they can afford to throw a lot of money. They've had the benefit of 35 to 50 years of compounding. And even though they had little money, it just compounded over the decades. We, as early mid-career radiologists, haven't had that compounding kick in for us. So this is a great book. So what do Bogleheads do, right? So Bogleheads, the model that I'm presenting today, it's been shown that stock picking is kind of like gambling because I'll give you an example. Let's say you bought Apple stock and the Wall Street estimates is that Apple is going to make a profit of $8 billion this year. And the results come out and Apple made 799, they missed the mark by 10 million in an 8 billion target, right? So if they hit the mark, now Wall Street is disappointed with the earnings and the stocks actually drop in value. So it's kind of like gambling. It's like EKG, goes up and down every day. And if you have 50, 60, 100 stocks, then you're getting tachycardia every morning because something is crashing, right? But if you're invested in the Bogleheads way, meaning you're invested in a low cost index mutual fund, then yeah, Apple can shut down tomorrow. Your portfolio only drops by 2% because that's how much of Apple is in the S&P index. Now, you don't have to chase the Nvidia stock because it's only 2%. But if you have a big enough portfolio, you have hundreds and thousands of dollars of Apple and Nvidia in your portfolio, except that you haven't bought the stock, right, directly. So the Bogleheads way is they focus on the net worth, not so much on the income. They invest every month. So some months the stocks are very pricey, some months they're incredibly cheap. But if you do this over the course of years and years, maybe even decades, you get an average price in the S&P index, and that's good enough. And then the most famous mutual fund by Vanguard is called VTSAX, Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund. It has like 7,000 stocks in it. So you put in $3,000, that's distributed over 6,000 companies. You are incredibly diversified, and they're incredibly cheap. So they only charge you something like 3 to 4 cents per $1,000 invested, almost free. And because there's not buying and selling that you're doing, you're not paying capital gains every year. And you buy it once and you only have to sell it in retirement. You can basically hold those funds like forever. So that's the Bogleheads way. Now this is the image that kind of woke me from my financial slumber. And I was like slaving away, getting really tired. I'm like, what is going on here? Like, when am I gonna reach this financial independence thing? Like, I don't even know how to even get there. It seems like utopian. And I'm reading these finance blogs, going to Bogleheads and this and that. I'm like, I have no idea what these people are talking about. Then I found this table on Mr. Money Mustache's website. And I saw that your financial freedom from the paycheck is not a function of your income, it's a function of your savings rate. Now, because most of our expenses are calibrated to our income anyway, most of us are living a life that our income can support. I think we're very good with that. So if you have a savings rate of, let's say, 60%, that's like incredible. If you have that, you can be actually done in 13 years. You're done. You don't need a dime more, right? But most people are kind of, I would say, between 50, 30, if you're lucky, 40%. So that leads to financial freedom in 2 to 3 decades, which we typically see in the radiology world. And if you read financial advice by financial gurus on the internet, they say, well, if you save anywhere between 5 to 15%, you'll be just fine. But these are people who are starting to work at age 17, right? Our first paycheck comes in the mid-30s, so they already have 2-decade head start on us. We're not going to catch up with them. Just the math doesn't work out. So, and also, like, if I'm saving, like, 10%, and I got my first paycheck at 35, best case scenario, I'm retiring at 85. That doesn't give me much hope, does it? So anyway, so it's a sliding scale. Know what your saving rate is, and that is how long it'll take to hit your financial number. So then it also begs the question, like, let's say you're an athlete, you showed up on the racing track, you're lined up for the race to start. You know that you're running a 100-meter dash or 200-meter or 400 meters or a marathon. You know that, right? You know what race you're running. But in finance, you don't know what the end target is. So you're on that track you're running, don't know when the finish line is, right? So we need some definition of, like, okay, at what number I have won the race, right? So what's the financial independence number? And that, if you are, most people agree that whatever your living expenses is, if you have 25 times that money, you're financially independent. But this number doesn't account for taxes. So if yours, let's say your annual living expenses are 150 grand, that is 150 grand post-tax money that you will sell your investments to live off, right? So some people say that, 30 or 33 times your living expenses is what gives them peace. But, between around 25, you're in pretty safe territory. So that's your end goal, right? I really like this. This is called FireCalc calculator. It's freely available online. And you have to only put in 2 variables. How much do you want to spend in a year, and how much are you worth, and how many years Do you want to support this portfolio? And it runs what's called a Monte Carlo simulation, which is basically random outcomes. Because there's a book on this. It's called Random Walk Down Wall Street. Because basically, what happens in the Wall Street is totally random. We think like every finance pundit is saying that this year is going to be amazing. When that happens, usually something bad happens, right? So, we don't know what the years are going to look like. So it may be, that the Middle East war blows up and, our stock market is crashing. We can't control that. It's totally random. So they run these Monte Carlo simulations to make sure that in the worst case scenarios, would you be able to retire or do you have to come back to work, right? So I like this because 2 or 3 variables and it runs this simulation. You have to pay several $100s to finance people to run this for you. Asset allocation. So what's asset allocation? So we could put all of our money in a single stock, but that would be a very risky way of investing. If the CEO died of that company in a plane crash, you'd lose half your money after the plane crash. That's not a very safe way of investing. And then if you're only invested in the US economy and it turns out that the European economy, even though right now it's not doing well, suddenly did really well, you would miss out on the gains because you didn't invest in Europe. And if you had 100% of your money in stocks, then the stock market crashes and you lose 60% of your money overnight. You wake up the next morning and you're like, I don't believe in investing at all. I give up, right? So the bonds are to cushion the fall. The asset allocation is to basically capture returns wherever they are. And I found this incredibly paralyzing. It's like, okay, what is the best asset allocation? And I should have only the very best. And it led to a lot of paralysis at my end. And I realized that there is no best asset allocation. You choose something, anything, even a bad one. But as long as you can stick with it over the course of your career and not change it with stock market fluctuations or what the CNN or Fox News is saying, you're good. You don't have to change your investment strategy based on what the news is saying, right? You just stick the course, put in money every month religiously, and it'll just grow, right? So here's just some examples. I'm sharing, what I do personally in the middle. Not that it's the best or anything, but even if you started with investing in the VTSAX, I explained, you are sufficiently diversified, and that is a premise of an entire book called The Simple Path to Wealth. And I'll put some pictures of some books for future reading if you guys are interested. So why low-cost mutual funds? Why not high-cost mutual funds? Why not active mutual funds where there is a smart dude who's a money manager who's doing the stock picking for you? Turns out that just like we study our outcomes, people in the financial academics also study outcomes, and they know that stock picking is not successful over the long term. The best investments are low-cost index funds, and even the pundits that you see on TV, if you ask them how they themselves invest their money, because they're commenting on individual stocks all day long, they're actually invested in index funds because that's the best way. So, but in investment, costs matter, like I was explaining. So if you are paying a ton in fees, so let's say the way you're invested is costing you 2% every year to invest your money, and you're like, it's just 2%, it's no big deal. Well, it's actually 40% of your estate value at retirement has been gifted away because you didn't pay attention to the fee that you're paying. Now, finance people are really smart, right? Just like, for example, when we read a film and there's a foreign body, we don't want the world to know that our surgeons left a foreign body in the abdomen. We say, I see a gossypipoma, right? It is a foreign body. It is somebody's mistake. Somebody was stupid, didn't do the count in the OR, but it's a gossypipoma. But it's a foreign body, right? So in the finance community, they don't give you the fee in dollars. They call it an expense ratio. So when a physician like ourselves goes to and reads the expense ratio, we're like, I don't know what the heck this is. Like, it's such a complicated terminology, and it's expressed in percentage to confuse you even more. Basically fee. So basically an expense ratio of 0.04% means you're paying 4 cents per $1,000. That's kind of how the expense ratio actually works. So expense ratio is the fee. It is mandated for every mutual fund to tell us what the fee is. And so if you invest in cheap things, you can keep the difference, and that just balloons exponentially. So I only thought that, the color of the US dollar is green, right? I didn't actually realize that money has 3 different flavors. So taxable account is your money in the paycheck. You save some of the money post-tax and you invest it in whatever mutual fund or, hopefully not stocks, but let's say whatever you did, it's in your taxable account. You can encash it, you just have to pay capital gains. Your 401k, your 403bs, whatever you do, it's tax deferred. You have never been taxed on it. So if that balloons into several $1 million by the time you're old, Uncle Sam has not taken its share. And depending on what the income tax rate are at that point, that can be a big chunk. Historically speaking, the United States this is the lowest taxation rate in the history of our country. It has never been this lower. And we've had rates going up to 80-90%. Check it out, go Google it. And when wars happen, taxation rates go through the roof because the country is bankrupt and they just seize your money. So right now we're living in the lowest taxation rates, but those rates may not hold when we retire in 2 or 3 decades from now. So we may think we have this money, but it may be a smaller piece because the government decided to take more money, bigger share. And then tax-free is the Roth investment. So the deal is Congress loves Roth. So what it is you decide to pay your taxes now because Congress agreed to tell you what the rate is going to be. So you make a deal, you pay your taxes, and now whatever money that's in your Roth bucket, if you're a savvy investor and you drew that money to $1 billion, you're not going to pay tax on it. So your most aggressive investment should be in the Roth bucket because the tax deferred, the 401k, 403bs, anything else, it's like making a deal with the devil where you're going to do your part, but the devil is going to tell you 3 decades from now, that is my share in this business. Like nobody makes deals like that, but that's what the government does. So as it turns out, you can put in a lot of money. And the government is aware that we are actually sleepwalking through our early financial journey when we're younger, so they give us, catch-up contribution limits as we age. So you can do I do all of them. I put in every single dollar in the retirement accounts that I possibly can. If you're younger, you can do an HSA, which allows you several $1,000s more. If you have some consulting gigs or any outside income, you can open an LLC. I have an LLC. It takes about an hour to create a company. It's that easy. And instead of getting paid yourself and paying the higher taxes, you can pay corporate taxes, which are a lot lower, and you get significantly higher contribution limits. And you can even employ family members legally and pay them a salary for minimal to little work, all legally, and stuff up more money in their 401k. So a lot of really crafty ways of saving more money. I'm not going to get into this, but actually co-authored this with my tax guy, and he was explaining to me, the benefits of having some side hustle income, and I wasn't getting it, and I got some of it, and I said, okay, my radiology peers don't get this also, so let's write a paper, and then we wrote a paper on radiology side hustles, and there's a table in that and how the tax benefits kind of change. It was a fun exercise. So turns out that not just diversification, but where you place different types of money in your different accounts can give you an extra leg up from the tax efficiency perspective. For example, you don't want high dividend paying things in your taxable account because you'll be paying taxes every year. Instead, you want to hide it in your 401k and deal with the tax implications at retirement. If you find that something that you were going to buy anyway is incredibly cheap right now, you probably want to buy it in your Roth so that when you get those incredible returns, it's tax-free for you. So where you place all of your funds is this spectrum. This is kind of from Wikipedia. This is all over the internet. Nothing special here. But end of the day, you want to keep it simple. If somebody is trying to pitch you something that you can understand, regardless of what level of financial knowledge you have, do not invest your money in that product. It has to be simple. You have to be able to understand it. Fees have to be transparent. They have to have a nice track record. And it turns out that investing in just 3 funds actually beats all the other complexities when the financial academics study this. And if you wanted to put, let's say, 50% in the US stock market, but last year did great and you have 60%, you actually should sell some of your US stocks and buy the beat up international stocks, even though it's completely counterintuitive. And that also adds 1%. If you do that once a year, it adds 1% to your portfolio growth compounded over the course of your period. 1% might seem very insignificant, but for somebody who's about to retire and has a big portfolio, that can be a significant chunk of money. So sometimes we're in a trough, and depending on what kind it is, like we've had different meltdowns, like we had DeepSeek lately, like random stuff happens and it leads to a dip in the stock market, and then, it's flashing red in the news. But, we've had nuclear bombs go off. We've had different wars. We've had world wars. And yeah, we've had those dips, and sometimes those dips were prolonged, but we've always recovered because we have to believe in the optimism of mankind. People are waking up every morning and working as hard as they can. So if you're investing for the long horizon, you'll do great. Now, you may lose money at the end of a decade. That can happen. You can do all of this right, and you may end up in the red at the end of 10 years. But you're not going to be in the red in 30, because this is a long game. This is not stock picking. This is not gambling, right? This is your retirement that we're talking about. So there's something called an investor policy statement. What it is, so imagine we had a banking collapse, right, a while back. So the banks are collapsing. So here you are, you're like, my lifetime savings are in a bank, and there's no banks in America anymore. Clearly I need to remove all my money from the market. Very logical thing to do at the time. But when you're at peace, so for example, you're relaxed right now, ask yourself, if the stock market went down 10% tomorrow morning, what would you do? If it went down 20%, what would you do? If it went down 50%, what would you do? And write it down. So when that happens, you can actually read what you had planned to do when you were relaxed. Because when you're in the heat of the moment, we don't think straight. This is called investor policy statement, and everybody should have one. In fact, some physician blogs, you can find some surgeons who put on their investor policy statement on their blogs. I should put mine too. But the first thing we need in terms of protecting the downside is disability. We can all become disabled. And if you can't practice radiology, you're disabled. That's what the policy should say. It shouldn't be like, oh, I can't practice radiology, but they're like, you can be a janitor. Like, that's not a good policy, right? So if you're completely disabled, if you can't practice to your highest degree, right? And if you have dependents, if you have family members, then think about a term life insurance policy. Once you have enough money, you can cancel it. You don't, but do not buy the variable annuity that I did. Everybody needs to have a will, healthcare power of attorney. These are basic documents that can be generated online in a few minutes. There's several blogs that do it. Best to do it with an attorney, because an online auto-generated form is not, maybe it's not legally binding, or it doesn't have all the legal language in it, but this is not hard to do. Because if we were to become disabled, what do we want done for our body, and who takes the decisions on our healthcare? It's called healthcare power of attorney. We should have a family member or a spouse or a child selected who we designate to make decisions in our best interest. And once you have a significant portfolio, the number that I've heard is a couple of million, something like 5 million and more, you should have an estate plan. So basically, if you were to get sued, you don't want your lifetime earnings to be debated in court, right? You need to put it in a state so that it's hard to get to and make it so hard for the attorneys that they go after somebody else and not you, basically. That's the idea. Because if you don't do this, there's something called probate. You have to go, like in Washington state, if the parents die, the kids become the property of the state. And if there's grandparents who want custody of the kids, they have to fight the state to get their grandkids. And it's a very, very expensive and lengthy process. And while this is figured out, your kids are, up for adoption and, crazy stuff happens. So you don't want to get into probate. You need to have these documents. And this is one of the antidotes. And these are some of my favorite books. Each of them tackles a different aspect of, like this book will teach you how to diversify and invest safely with just one mutual fund. This book will tell you how to think about money. There's so many nuggets in this book where I read those lines and I was like, okay, this is like the philosophical Bible of finance. And then your money or your life is basically how stories of how people with not that much income, become multimillionaires. And just for fun, Vicky Robin actually lives in the greater Seattle area. And then Ramit Sethi gives you a 6-week plan, starting from having no financial plan to having like a robust financial plan within 6 weeks. So I've read all of these books and more, but if I had to recommend somebody, start here and start moving in that direction. So you want to do this, what I'm saying, 1099 is the side hustle income, but you want to protect the downside, you need to start investing. Always be on the lookout for some side hustle for the tax benefits, and then optimize so that it's not un-American to pay more taxes than are due, right? It doesn't make you a bad citizen if you just pay just whatever is your due. You don't have to go overboard and pay way more taxes because the government doesn't need your money. It can always print more money. But if you lose, and now we don't even have to print money. We just add a zero. It's all digital anyway. So, people think like, oh, I need to do my due share for my country. It's all phantom money now. But it does matter, right? So don't get fixated on what is my salary. Think about what's your net worth. Know how much you're spending, what your cash flow situation and saving rate is, protect your assets, and then, hopefully your wellness will improve and you get more joy from radiology. So I make videos. I haven't made some in a while because I had to do some learning and take some courses on teaching online, which took more time than I thought. But finance is just one topic that I make videos about. It like the theme of my channel is basically everything that you need should have been formally taught to you in school because it's so important in life, but nobody ever told you anything. And I take some courses, I read a lot of books, and then I distill them with a spin for what people like me would need in a few minutes. So anyway, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed my visit. I'd always heard about Yale. My daughter is going to college, and she was getting very excited. It's like, my daddy is going to Yale. So at least I have a fan at home. It's really hard to impress your kids, especially when they're teenagers, right? But she was very impressed that I'm going to Yale. And I'm here to make new friends and see an amazing department and create some wonderful memories. Thank you for having me.